Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar regarding preparing for an SEC exam using Cordium's pilot software. My name is Laura Kate Garner, and I am a Vice President in the Compliance Consulting team based in New York. And I am also joined by my colleague Melissa McGarry, who's an Assistant Vice President in the Software Client Services team based in San Francisco. Melissa and I were asked to present today, and I'll give you a little bit of information on my background for why it would be relevant. Over the course of my career over the past 20 years, I've been involved in approximately 5 SEC exams working in-house, and I've been involved in 3 NASD, or what is now FINRA, examinations. Since joining Cordium in 2016, I've assisted with 3 SEC exams for our client base and 1 state regulatory exam in the state of Texas. Melissa's experience with Cordium began 5 years ago. She's been an integral part of the pilot software team from its inception, involved in the development and implementation and the eventual rollout of the pilot software. She now also supports clients by working on the client services group and by helping with periodic upgrades to the pilot software. So I'm delighted that she'll be sharing the presentation with me today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa for a few housekeeping items on directions on how to ask questions and answer the polls.
Thanks, Laura Kate. So I'll go over to the next slide. So we definitely encourage all of our attendees to ask questions both during and after the presentation. You'll see that on the GoToWebinar interface, there is a question section, so you're able to type your questions in there. We'll read off all of the questions at the end of the presentation. You'll also be prompted with some polls during the presentation as well.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate that. So the goal of today's presentation is hopefully that you'll learn more about SEC examiners' common areas of focus and the documents that they most often request in the course of an exam, gain some insight on the typical timeline and what the requirements are for a never-before-examined registrant, gather actions and tips that can help you proactively prepare for an exam. There's the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And I would add that how do you have a successful regulatory exam? And that would be organize, organize, organize. Hopefully you'll also gain an understanding of the ability to quickly provide responses and how this can set a positive tone with the examiners, and how the inability to do that can set a negative tone and potentially have some consequences for the firm. And also turn this back over to Melissa, the solutions that Cordium offers to track information that would help you prepare for an SEC exam.
Thanks, Laura Kate. So after Laura Kate's presentation, I will be demonstrating the various functionalities within Pilot that can help your firm prepare for an audit. Pilot is a web-based application that's centered on an interactive compliance calendar. You're able to use Pilot to track, monitor, and evidence your entire compliance program. Pilot allows you to easily produce exports based on your various compliance tasks, which you can in turn provide to examiners.
Okay, so we're actually going to kick off with our first poll question today. That's poll question number 1. We'll open that up for your responses. We wanted to know when your firm's last SEC examination was, and there are a few choices there. 1, never. The firm has not been examined within the past 12 months, within the past 1 to 3 years, or more than 4 years ago. So if you could just take a moment. By way of introduction on the types of SEC exams, I just wanted to start with a few statistics. OC, the Office of Compliance, Investigations and Examinations National Exam Program, was founded over 20 years ago in 1995, so it turns 22 later this year. It's headed by Mark Wyatt, and in November of 2016, he gave a speech to the NSCP talking through some various aspects and giving folks sort of an insider's look at OC and the NEP. And I pulled some very interesting statistics from that speech. First of all, the inaugural year that the National Exam Program was in place, they conducted 1,075 exams. Last year, fiscal year end for 2016, they completed over 2,400 examinations. Now, that's not just registered investment advisors. It does include other registrants, but by way of the numbers, regarding the number of registrants that OC actually oversees, it's over 28,000 different firms and entities. 12,000 of those are investment advisors, 11,000 are mutual funds and exchange-traded funds, 4,000 are broker-dealers, 650 are municipal advisors, 400 are transfer agents, 18 are national securities exchanges. That also would add FINRA, the MSRB, SIPC, the PCAOB, and 8 active clearing agencies. So there are a lot of folks on the rolls now after Dodd-Frank. 12,000 is a huge number, and just in the past 2 calendar years, they've had an additional 2,000 registrants. So of that 12,000 number, 2,000 of those are firms that have registered just in the past year. So the types of SEC examinations that are conducted, one would be a for-cause examination, one would be a sweep, the other would be a presence exam, which includes never before examined registrants. Why would they kick off a for-cause exam? Usually this is because a tip has been received by the commission or they receive an investor complaint, which we hope will never be the case with anyone on the call today. Sweep exams are done when the SEC is gathering information because they're looking at policy making, they're looking at issuing risk alerts, or they have issued a risk alert, and then they're going to gather information in the field. Occasionally, sweep exams can turn into deficiency letters and enforcement, but generally sweep exams are used for gathering information. Some recent example of those would be Rule 105 Reg M under the Securities Act of 33, where you look at short selling and the timing of that against an initial public offering, advisors' use of social media, alternative mutual funds in this space, and then the most recent, which I think has impacted all of Cordium's clients, is cybersecurity. As far as presence exams, newly registered advisors can expect to be visited by the commission between 6 months after registration up to 2 years after registration. They generally try to hit every new registrant within that window, but that is again based on a risk assessment that they do that's converted from data that they are mining in the industry. And this would include public filings that you submit and private filings that you submit to the SEC and things that they follow as far as registrations and news in the media. And they collate all that information, and then that's given over to the NEP for them to prioritize on a risk basis which examiners they will visit from the various field offices. So a routine follow-up exam after your initial exam could be anywhere from 2 years to 5 years on average. There are some registrants that go as long as, let's say, 10 to 12 years before a subsequent exam, but there tends to be a 5-year cycle that we've seen at least out of the New York regional office. The review period of an exam can be anywhere from a quarter to 2 years, ending with the most recent month end or quarter end. And with that, I'm going to pop over to the poll question now, and I'm going to see, let's see how folks responded. All right, interesting stuff. Okay, so it looks like the majority of folks that are on the call today have not been through an exam before. Okay, so regarding the timeline of an exam, our next slide, typically an exam will take 3 to 6 months to complete. There are some limitations that are imposed by the regulations, specifically Section 4E of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 requires the examination staff to complete an exam within 180 days of one of two situations, whichever is later. The first would be the end of the on-site portion of the exam, and the second would be 180 days after they receive the last requested document that they've asked from the entity that's being examined. So depending on that, again, Typically, you could expect 3 to 6 months. We have seen exams that could drag on from 9 to 12 months, but hopefully that would not be the case. You generally receive notification from the lead examiner that the exam will commence. Sometimes they'll call you ahead and they'll verify the email address and the physical address of the office so they can mail the letter. Most often they'll call and they'll verify the email of the CCO because they will be inviting you to use a secure web portal to transfer the documents to them. If you have been through a registration in the an exam in the past, in the old days they used to ask you to provide 2 paper copies of everything and box that up and ship it off to the office. After that, they turned to CD-ROM, and thankfully now everything is web-based, which really has made the examination process much easier for the registrants and for the examiners. So once you receive that initial letter, it usually will contain a document request, and we have seen initial document requests that are as few as, let's say, 10 items and as many as 100, but the standard request list is between 50 and 60 items, and they will ask you to provide all of that information through the web-based portal within 7 calendar days. We have seen a few exams where they've been more aggressive, where they've given them, say, 4 calendar days and as many as 10 calendar days to provide the initial documents. But the days of having a month's notification and having several weeks to collate the initial document request no longer exist. After they receive the initial documents, they'll let you know about the on-site phase when they plan to visit your offices. Most common that we see is that the examiners will be there for a week. Some are able to complete the on-site phase in just 2 to 3 days. Sometimes they're there for longer than a month. The day 1 presentation is key to making introductions and giving the examiners an overview of the firm. The next thing that they'll want to do is they'll want to set up specific interviews with senior staff. This usually is going to be the investment staff, senior management, and anyone who is the head of a department or a division. After the on-site phase is complete, they've gathered documents, they've asked relevant questions, and they've completed their interviews, then they'll start the off-site review. This could include additional requests for information. Again, the average there is usually 15 to 20, but we've seen firms that have received as few as 2 additional requests, upwards of 20 additional requests. There are always follow-up phone calls, and there is a potential that although they've started the off-site review phase, they could come back on site if they think that another in-person interview with a member of senior staff is warranted. Then once they've collated all the information, they've made their assessment, they'll generally do an exit interview, and the exit interview is very important because sometimes they'll provide you with the roadmap for any deficiencies if your firm is receiving a deficiency letter. They'll then mail out the closing examination letter, which again would need to be provided within 180 days of either the end of the on-site or the last day that they received documentation from the registrant. And then you're given 30 days, the advisor is given 30 days to respond to any deficiencies on how you plan to address those. You can also ask for an extension of 30 days, which most advisors do, giving you 60 days to confirm how you're going to address or that you have addressed any deficiencies that were mentioned. Moving on to the next slide. There was a recent risk alert that was put out by the National Exam Program with regards to the top 5 items that they generally see as issues during exams that end up as deficiencies in the closing examination letter. The first of those, and it can be somewhat misleading in the sense that they'll cite folks for the general compliance rule, and the reason that this is cited most often is not necessarily because it's a direct violation of failing to have policies and procedures or failing to have a CCO or failing to conduct an annual review, but that if there's another area of the firm where they see a potential weakness, it can end up being a double whammy. So for recent for firms that have recently been through enforcement for issues with fund expense allocation, not only was that improperly charging the funds with fees that they shouldn't have been assessed, but the exam program will generally go beyond that, and the enforcement division will say that that was a weakness or a failure in your policies and procedures, and that weakness is then also cited as a violation of the compliance rule. Other items that they see with regards to violations of 20647 is that manuals are either not current or they're not tailored to the business. Regulatory filings, including inaccurate or late filings, and the three that they most commonly see that are either inaccurate, incomplete, or filed beyond the deadline are the ADV, the Form PF, or the Form D for the funds. They very often see issues with regards to the custody rule, where advisors have failed to recognize that they have custody over assets. The other item that they've seen often is that while the firm is doing a surprise exam of its funds, the surprise examination doesn't meet all the technical rule requirements. So that's something to be aware of, and maybe check with your auditing firm that's doing the surprise exam to make sure that what they're doing comports with the requirements under the rule. Code of ethics and the types of things that they see there are either missing or inadequate records, late employee filings, or that they're missing forensic testing around code of ethics. And the last one would be books and records, which is sort of a catch-all, and those would either be missing or that they would be inconsistent with one another. Moving on to our next slide. The most common document requests, they're always going to ask for general information, including your organizational documents and any kind of structured documents, the types of contracts that you engage in, and the offering memorandums of any private funds that you manage. They're also going to ask for information on your compliance program. They'll look to gather all the versions or revisions of the compliance manual over the review period. They'll always want a list of your clients, your access persons, and any affiliates that you do business with. They'll take a very close look at the marketing materials and any investor presentations that you maintain. Keep in mind that this could also be a due diligence questionnaire. They'll look for a day one presentation that you'll be providing during the on-site portion of the exam. I would say more than half the time now they're asking for the day one presentation before they come on site in the initial document request, but there are some of the offices and some of the individual examiners that wait for that until the first meeting with the firm on site. They're going to ask for portfolio management information, specifically the trade blotter and the holdings, and they have very specific requirements with regards to sending them that information in Excel now so that they can plug that into their systems and do analysis. They're going to ask for forensic testing on conflicts of interest. They're going to verify the safety of client assets by asking you for statements and then reaching out independently to all of the custodians that are utilized and getting duplicate copies of the same records to make sure that they match up. They'll ask for valuation procedures. If you maintain a valuation committee, they probably will ask for all of the meeting minutes, so that's something to make sure that you've kept track of. They'll ask for any written annual compliance reviews or reports, and they'll also ask for something called a compliance risk inventory. Sometimes that's called a compliance risk self-assessment, an RCSA. Now, an RCSA isn't actually required under the Advisors Act, but it's something that, because it became a best practice for the larger firms, it now has drilled down, and it's one of the items that they always ask for on the standard request letter. So there they're looking for the ongoing risk identification. They might also ask for internal audit reviews, records of non-compliance with the Code of Ethics, annual or interim reviews of your policies and procedures, information on reporting and investor protection, your privacy policies and procedures, information to facilitate testing with respect to advisory trading activities. So they'll be looking to see if you have policies around trade errors, investment guidelines, investment allocation, best X, and soft dollars. They'll also look at your brokerage arrangements, conflicts of interest and insider trading and the handling of material non-public information. And they could also ask you for copies of your financial records, your balance sheet, cash receipts, your general ledger, and last but not least, they could ask you for details on your anti-money laundering program, even if the program is that you have utilized or outsourced the fund administrator for that aspect of your compliance program. Real quick, we want to reach out for our second poll question, which is, which aspect of the exam process would you find the most challenging? We've got a few items there: formatting responses to the examiner's specifications, gathering or organizing requested documents, limited resources, and this would be for firms where maybe the CCO wears more than one hat, or where you have a compliance program of one individual, potentially, preparing employees for interviews with the examiners, you're not sure, or all of the above. So we'll leave that open for folks to respond to. So then, how can Pilot help? Moving on to our next slide. As I mentioned before, organization is really the key. The better organized you are, the easier the entire process will be. Having a detailed compliance calendar that you can provide to the examiners, which again speaks to organization, that's something they really like to see. Calendaring reminders, the ability to assign and share tasks is something that Pilot can help you with, that of course would make everything that you're doing easier. We have a suggested task library in Pilot. It also gives you the ability to document and support actions that are undertaken. It's a central location for commonly requested documents. And then it also, through the task inventory, once you build tasks into Pilot, you could then convert those into a risk inventory, and that would help you to build that RCSA that you could provide to the SEC. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Melsa for the demo of Pilot.
Great, thanks, Laura Kate. So we'll go ahead now and take a more in-depth look at Pilot and how you can utilize Pilot to effectively organize your entire compliance program. Upon navigating to the calendar page, you'll see a high-level overview of all of your compliance tasks for that particular month. Your Pilot account was customized using a combination of tasks from our suggested task library, as well as any custom tasks that might be more specific to your firm's compliance program. Pilot's suggested task library is an excellent compliance resource, which oftentimes contains links to third-party websites, as well as references to specific regulatory rules. To view the suggested task library when you're logged into Pilot, you'll hover over Add Task, and then you'll click Suggested Tasks. So once you're in our suggested task page, you have the option to search by different filters. So if you wanted to see only code of ethics tasks, for example, you can search for that as a classification. If you only wanted to see tasks that had a low risk rating, you could do that as well. So you can check off any combination of those that you would like. So to actually add one of the tasks from our suggested task library, you can simply check off the task here, and you'll then click Next. You're then given the option to assign that task to a certain calendar, and you can also give a category as well to that task. If you leave the date settings as is, that will put the task on the calendar with our default recurrence pattern. So for this particular task, 13F, the built-in recurrence pattern is 45 days after the fiscal quarter end. So Pilot will know, since that's the default recurrence pattern, to put the task on that specific date. Once you've chosen the properties, you'll select Bulk Add Task here. And then once you've added the task to the calendar, you will see the success modal on the upper right-hand side. So to actually view the task, we can go back to the calendar. We'll go ahead and jump over to August where that task occurs. So in addition to customizing the recurrence pattern as well as the categories, you do also have the option to edit various properties of the task. So to do that, you'll simply click here on the task. When you're in this instance of the task, You do also have the option to see any upcoming instances by clicking on this drop-down menu. So to actually edit the properties, you'll click here on Edit Series. So you'll see that the built-in description as well as information does appear here. So here you'll see that there's a link to the SEC's website. You do have the option to edit the built-in description and information, and you can also choose to edit the task color. So by default, Pilot does assign certain colors to certain categories of tasks. For example, all tasks that are ADV tasks are going to show up as red. All Code of Ethics tasks will show up as green, etc. If you wanted to use your own color scheme, you can definitely do so by clicking on any of the different colors here. So the colors are a great way to just immediately know what category the task corresponds to when you're looking at the calendar. So here you'll see that this risk rating is built in. So by default, the risk rating for this task is medium-low. You do have the option to change that risk rating by clicking here on this drop-down menu, and then you'll see the different options. So all of these risk ratings will appear in the various exports that you produce from Pilot, and I'll show you what those look like later on as well. So here's where you can actually edit the recurrence pattern. So like I mentioned, this recurrence pattern is built in. So this one, for this particular task, isn't something that you would really want to manipulate as it's based on a regulatory requirement. But for any other task, you can definitely change the recurrence pattern if you wanted to specify that the recurrence pattern was daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, etc. Another great functionality in Pilot is the ability to set assignees. So if you would like to specify who on your compliance team is responsible for a particular task, you can set them up as an assignee. So you would simply click in the assignees field and then set that user up as an assignee. That's also something that you can search by in Pilot as well. Next, we have our alerts functionality. So the alerts can be customized to whatever you want, essentially. So if you wanted to receive a reminder email for a task 30 days before the due date, 10 days before the due date, 5 days before the due date, you can set those up however you'd like. You can also customize the recipients as well. So if you only wanted to receive, for you to receive the reminder email 30 days in advance and then someone else on your team to receive it 5 days in advance, you can definitely do that as well. You also have the option to set up reminders that would go out after the task. So if you didn't mark the task as completed in Pilot, you can set an alert after the task so that you would get an alert letting you know that you did have a past due task. So here you'll see where you're able to actually customize the properties of the alert. You do also have the option to set up a customized message as well. So if there was anything specific about the task that you wanted to remind yourself about, you can create a custom reminder email for that particular task. Also, all of the assignees that you set up will also appear in any of the alerts as well. Great. So like I mentioned, you do also have the option to create a custom task within Pilot. To do this, you'll simply hover over any date in the calendar and then click New Task. So now you'll see this new task modal. One item to note when you are in the process of creating a custom task, if you ever wanted to go back into our suggested task library to see if that task is already available, you can toggle into the task library just by clicking on that link. So here you'll need to give the task a name. And then you're also able to add in the description as well as the information. And again, like I mentioned, you do also have the option to change the color for the task as well. One item to note, you will also have to choose a calendar for the task to appear on. Otherwise, you won't be allowed to save it. So just be sure and do that. And then you also have the option to set up the risk rating as well. So you'll simply choose that here. Repeats, again, you can change this recurrence pattern. So by default, the custom tasks are one-off tasks. So they won't have a recurrence pattern, but if you change repeats to yes, you'll see that that recurrence pattern will appear as well. And then you will simply click Save, and that will put the task on your calendar. So now you'll see since I made that a daily task, it does appear every single day.
Melsa, we've had a question come in from one of the participants asking how Pilot differs from ComplianceTrak.
That is a great question. So there are a number of different features that Pilot has that ComplianceTrak doesn't. The first is just the interface itself is much more user-friendly and more modern looking. Within Pilot, and this is something that I'll show towards the end of my presentation, you're able to produce more customizable exports. So from ComplianceTrak, you only have the option to export the calendar either into a PDF for the monthly view or into one large export for the yearly view. In Pilot, you can choose any date range, you can choose certain fields. It's much more customizable, which I'll show you later on. Also within Pilot, there is this search toolbar on the upper right-hand side. So within ComplianceTrak, there wasn't sort of any dynamic reporting within the application itself. So within Pilot, if you wanted to see only tasks that you had marked as completed, you can check this off. If you only wanted to see a certain task series, etc., any categories. In relation to the categories, in ComplianceTrak, those categories were completely static. You did not have the ability to add any new ones or remove the standard ones. Within Pilot, we think of the categories more as tags. The reason behind that is that you can associate multiple categories to a particular task. You can also create as many categories as you'd like. We do have our standard ones that we add to all of our new Pilot accounts. If you didn't want to use any of the categories, you can simply delete all of them. You also don't have to use the categories at all if you don't want to either. The other major difference between ComplianceTrak and Pilot is the dashboard functionality. So wasn't planning on showing this, but it is a great piece to highlight a difference between ComplianceTrak and Pilot. So if you click on the dashboard, you'll see that there's a particular layout here. So you have the option to customize this layout to show whatever you would like. If you click this down arrow here, you'll see the different layouts that you can select. So you would just click the one that you would like, and then you can actually customize what information appears in each of these widgets. So we have the option for a notes widget. So clients will tend to use the notes widget to put any static text that they frequently access. A good example that I frequently see is clients adding in their IARD password here. Anything else that you frequently need to access, you can add as a note. The other one that's really helpful is the task window. So if you click on the settings here, this is where you have the option to display what tasks you can see. So you'll see that you can name this one, let's say, upcoming tasks that are just on my general compliance calendar in the current month that are either upcoming, overdue, or that I've completed. You can also only choose to see upcoming tasks that are assigned to you, and you can also search for a specific category as well. So once you save that, now you'll see that this box populates with all of my upcoming tasks. So it is dynamic, so it knows that if we were in July, it would just only show us tasks from July. You also have the option to click on that task, and it will take you straight to where that task is on the calendar. Great. So I'll go back to the calendar, and then last but not least, another difference between ComplianceTrak and Pilot is that in ComplianceTrak, you were restricted to only having one calendar. In Pilot, you can create as many calendars as you would like, and you do also have the option to permission those calendars out. So if you created a calendar and you didn't want anyone else at the firm to be able to see that, you can set it up so that you're the only one who's able to see that calendar. Great, thanks, Laura Kate. So now I'll show you how to actually document your completion of a task within Pilot. So when you're looking at the calendar, you will simply click here on the task. Great, and then you'll want to choose the date that you completed the task. You can also add in any notes. So if you did want to specify that there was anything that you did with the task, or if there was still anything else that needed to be done at a later time, you can utilize the notes section for that. We do also have a comments functionality. So if you do want to document a conversation between you and another member of the compliance team, I would definitely recommend using the comments functionality for that. It will keep track of who left the comment and when they left it, and it will create a thread, and you'll be able to see that entire conversation. You do also have the option to attach documents to a task in Pilot. So if you click here on Add Documents, you'll see that you have the ability to upload any document. So for example, if you wanted to upload your checklist for your day one presentation, you can simply check off the document and then hit upload. And now you'll see that that appears here. If I decide I don't want it anymore, I can go ahead and remove it. Otherwise, you'll click Save. Once you do that, you'll see that the event has successfully been saved. Great. And I did briefly go over this, but you can use any of these filters on the upper right-hand side. So if you only wanted to see tasks that were marked as completed, you can select that. Anytime that you do utilize any of these filters, they do turn green, reminding you that you are using them.
Mel, so we had another question come in with regards to ComplianceTrak versus Pilot, whether or not there'll be two standalone products or whether current users of ComplianceTrak will be migrated over to Pilot.
So at the moment, we will eventually be completely sunsetting ComplianceTrak. We don't actively sell it anymore. Any clients that do currently utilize ComplianceTrak and that want to move over to Pilot are able to do so completely free of charge. We move the calendar going forward onto Pilot. We don't upload any historical data, so you will always have access to all of the historical information that's within ComplianceTrak.
Great, thanks.
Great. So now in terms of producing the exports from Pilot, so right now we're on the standard full monthly calendar view. To actually produce the exports, you'll need to toggle over to the event list view, and this is where you can produce customizable exports. So by default, the Events tab will show you all of the tasks within the next month. You can manipulate that date range as needed. So if you only wanted to see everything from June 6th until August, you can do so here. You'll see that the number of tasks will change. You can always go back to the task, just click on it. You can also always click on this information for a summary of the task as well. If you had added any documents to the task, they would also appear here as items. And then if you added any assignees, those would also show up here as well. If you had marked the task as completed, there would also be a check mark in this completed column. So to actually produce your export, you will click here on Export List. And this is where, like I mentioned, you can produce a customizable export. This is one of the big items that ComplianceTrak does not have that Pilot does. So you can choose to export the list either to Excel or to Word, and then you can choose what columns actually appear within the export. So by default, the name of the task and the date will occur on the export, but if you wanted to see all of these different columns, you can simply check them off. The risk rating column is the one that will look like the matrix that Laura Kate had mentioned. So you'll just be sure and check all of these off. You can also choose the order as well as the column name, and then you'll click Export. That will then produce one very large Excel spreadsheet showing you all of the information that you had checked off. So here you'll see that all of the tasks with the medium-low risk rating will show up as yellow. Anything with medium-high shows up as orange, and then everything with a low risk rating does show up as green. Oops, sorry. So next, the Event Series tab. So this is another place that you can produce an export from. So if you click Export List, that will produce this entire list into one Excel spreadsheet. The difference between the Event Series export and the Events export is that for the Events export, if you were to select the entire year for this, any task that was on the calendar quarterly, for example, the quarterly transactions reports being due, would show up 4 times on the Events export, whereas on the Event Series export, it would only show up once just because it's an ongoing task series. Great. On the upper right-hand side, you can use our global search functionality. Pilot does have an advanced search tool that allows you to type in any search term, and anything matching the term that's within your Pilot account will appear as a result. The title and contents of any documents that you've uploaded would also appear in this search as well. So if we just type in, for example, 13F and then click search, we'll then see everything that's within our Pilot account as a result, and you'll also see that any files that we've uploaded do also appear as one of the results. If you click more, you're then taken to the advanced search page. This gives you more details about the matches. So here you'll see this match is a file that we've uploaded, whereas this match is a task series that's on my calendar. Next, the Documents tab. So the Documents tab is a centralized portal for all of the documents that you have ever uploaded to Pilot. So by default, you're only going to see documents that were uploaded within the current month. If you wanted to push back this date range to see documents that you've uploaded in the past year, you can do so. If you only wanted to see documents that were attached to tasks that you had marked as completed, only tasks that were assigned to you, etc., you can choose any of those. Once you click filter, you'll see all of the documents appear. And then if there were any matches, you would then have the option to click on those documents and then download them back onto any computer. Great. So I'll go ahead now and let you take the reins again, Laura Kate.
Thanks so much for that, Melissa. So just to recap, the various tasks that you can set up and then assign risk ratings to, you can provide the report that could be transferred into that risk inventory. And one example when you had pulled up 13F that came to mind would be is that some of our private equity clients wouldn't necessarily need to file 13F reports, but this is a question that usually is on the standard it's on the standard request list that you provide copies of all of your regulatory reporting. And when you do a risk compliance self-assessment, one thing that they would want you to do is to look at what the various aspects or requirements are for advisors, and you could use that task, pull it up, as Melissa is doing in the background right now, and you could change that risk rating from medium low to low, and you could change the occurrence from quarterly to annually. And then if you keep scrolling down to the bottom, you could also add notes that say, due to the type of holdings that our firm manages for clients, being private equity and private funds, the likelihood of meeting the requirements for 13F are very low. And then this one recurring task would then appear so it could be converted into that RCSA grid that many of the examiners like to see. Thanks, Melissa. So in closing, a few other tips and reminders for rules of the road when you're faced with the inevitably stressful event of an SEC exam. Immediate notification of any production delays when you're producing documents are appreciated. It's something that's stressful for the examiners since they're under timing requirements to complete the exam on their end. Any delays in producing documents that have been requested, it can set a very negative tone for the exam. Mailing a hard copy of the Freedom of Information Act request letter. That's something that a lot of firms sometimes trip up, where they'll put a FOIA disclosure on the actual materials that they're providing, but then they haven't actually sent the letter to DC requesting FOIA. Organizing sequential bait stamping, since they do require that all the documents that are provided have bait stamping. Sometimes after the on-site phase is done, or potentially during the on-site phase, the examiners might ask for additional documents that are brought up in conversation that weren't on the initial request list. We would recommend that you ask for any additional document requests in writing from the SEC. That way, as you're taking an inventory of what they've requested and what you've provided, you can make sure that you've not only met all the things that they've asked you to complete, but also that you can keep track of an inventory of everything that you provided. Another thing would be safety in numbers. We would recommend having at least 2 people representing the advisor on all phone calls and in all in-person meetings. And then last but not least, defer answering to confirm accurate information. It's completely legitimate to say, let me double check that and get back to you. Better to pause, consider it, look up the exact answer and get back to them than give them misinformation in passing. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions. And while we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I wanted to give the results of the second poll. It was a tie for formatting responses to examiner specifications and gathering and organizing the requested documents. So that's very interesting, and I can say from my experience that for me the most stressful part was the gathering and organizing, because you were collating a lot of different information from various folks in the firm. Let's see. Okay, we do have an additional question that came in. How can I get a copy of today's presentation? Our marketing group will be contacting all of today's participants and sending an email that will have a link to the recorded presentation and the slides. Let's see. All right, and then another question that came in, any changes in exams since the SEC changes due to the election? That's a very good question. Actually, and this is something that not so much is based on what we've seen from clients, but those of us that on the staff here, the consulting staff that attend industry events, frequently there are folks that are presenters from the various regulatory agencies, the SEC, the NFA, the CFTC, and as recently as 2 weeks ago, this came up as a question at one of the panel discussions that I attended, and the folks from the SEC said that no, other than what you hear in the media, that it's exactly the same as it was in October 2016 as it is today. Their priorities haven't changed, the agencies haven't changed, other than the changes in the very, very senior echelons of the SEC, and that at the examiner level, nothing has changed in their day-to-day. So that's an excellent question. We had another question come in. Can I use Pilot to track other aspects of my business? Cybersecurity has been a potential hot button. Could I use Pilot to track my cybersecurity program? Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Definitely. That is a great question. You can utilize Pilot to keep track of really anything that you'd like. It's not necessarily specific to compliance. So if you wanted to create custom calendars within your Pilot account, you can hover over this little gear icon here, and you then have the option to create as many calendars as you would like. You'll need to give the calendar a name, and then you'll need to permission it out. By default, if you create the calendar, you are the only one that has the ability to see that calendar. If there's anyone else that you want to have access to that calendar, you will need to be sure and grant them permissions to it. If you're adding in any new calendars that aren't specific to compliance, if you wanted to add in a cybersecurity calendar, a marketing calendar, vendor due diligence, anything like that, you can definitely do that. You will have to populate the calendar using the custom task functionality.
Thanks. So I think that's all the questions that we received. So we're going to go ahead and close out the session. Just wanted to say again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate your attention.